Hello. And I have it on this introductory slide as we're waiting for people to come in. This infographic was created with the help of Google Gemini and its lovely nano banana. Yay. I was using Google Gemini to get the history of the population of Chicago. That was correct, by the way, and I did check it. And I asked for it to create an infographic for me because I wanted, something nice for a post, maybe promote it on X or LinkedIn, perhaps. And this looks very pretty if you don't look at it too closely. So while we're waiting for people to come in, and I'll give a little introduction to myself so you can look. If you look a little closer at the numbers and the graph, there are parts of this that work and parts of this that don't work very well. So I'm Mary Pat Campbell. Some of you may already know me, but who am I? Why am I talking here on AI and professionalism? I'm a life annuity actuary, but I have specialized in talking about best practices, standards with regards to modeling. I've really focused on spreadsheets because that's what a lot of us do, but on coding. And now, of course, a lot of us are using AI in our work. And then some of us may not want to use AI, but it's kind of creeping into everything we do. So how do we handle that? I'm going to revisit this graph at the end of the talk, so that will be fun. Moving on. Yes, professionalism surrounding AI and emerging technologies. If you're US based, and maybe if you're not US based, this might count as a professionalism credit. We'll see. This part is pre-recorded. There will be a Q&A session that will be live. That means I will appear and you can ask me questions. I believe there will be some kind of Q&A box that you can put in questions during the playing of this recording, and I should be on, typing away while this is going on. So as we start, I'm going to disclose the use of AI in creating this presentation. I used Copilot, that's Microsoft's Copilot, embedded in Word and PowerPoint and all of that jazz. And I will explain how I used it in a moment. And Google's Gemini, not just in creating messed up infographics, but beyond that for some of the content. The original sources of the content were credited and reviewed. There'll be links. You'll be able to get these slides, of course. I did create an entire deck using Copilot based on an American Academy of Actuaries document, and I'll show you that document in the middle of this presentation. This is not that deck. In the appendix to these slides, which I'm not going to get into, there will be a link to PDF and a PowerPoint version of the deck that Copilot completely created so you can see what that looks like. The software is, iterative, and perhaps my prompt wasn't that good in creating the decks from, the original source. But I have been creating slide decks from other documents that I've written and other people that I work with have written, because I generally don't do actuarial work as my day job. I work in, you could say, market research for the insurance sector in the US. And I'm often looking at sales trends, performance trends in the US sector, primarily life and annuity business lines of business, but reinsurance, the general account investments, and that kind of thing. And I'm often using AI to transform the original findings into all sorts of products. So I'm finding this as a useful tool in general, but how do I get good quality communications out of that? So I'll be talking a little bit about that, but also the professionalism standards that we have as actuaries, which even if I'm not doing strictly actuarial work, I still hew to those standards to keep high quality results. So here's one of the prompts I use. I have a paid account to Google Gemini because I feel it's given me good quality, and they do keep coming up with new features, not nano banana. Sorry, I haven't gotten anything useful out of that yet. So, hi, Gemini. I like saying howdy. I have good manners. You don't have to do that, by the way. Come the robot uprise. Okay, I don't know. I'm an actuary and I plan on talking with a few different actuarial groups soon on professionalism and AI use as an actuary. I gave a talk on this last year, that's true, 2024, which can be seen on YouTube here. And I gave it and it did upload the video I saw. And I'll attach the file of the slides as a PDF. The standards are the same, but I'd like to use newer examples. So, and then I also gave the slides at my Dropbox. This is so you guys can get this when you get the slides later. It actually did take in the slides and the video and started giving me back some newer examples in different areas, such as legal and academia, because those were some of the examples I had last year. And I had a conversation with Gemini, and you'll see some of the examples as we go along through this deck that I used. And I went back to the original news sources that it gave me. And I always, come back to Gemini. I think, could you give me the sources? It doesn't necessarily give me the sources unless I prompt Gemini for them. So this is a pre-recorded talk portion. I'm using Camtasia Editor and Audiate from TechSmith. Product placement. No, I'm not getting paid. It has AI features to edit it, and I obviously have used it. I'm cutting out ums and ahs and pauses. Actually, I hope it didn't just cut these out. I really don't have a lot of time to do this by hand. So I use the AI features. So if there are aspects of this video that look weird due to AI editing, I apologize. It also has other AI features that I could have used, but I did not. I can change the audio to insert words. I could have even put in an avatar of myself. I'm not. This is me. Hello. I did put in various filters and various effects, remove the background, and you'll see some other effects that occur at various points. I think those are minimal. I could have also translated this into other languages and put different words in my mouth. That said, this does take time. And if there's going to be any languages other than English coming out of my mouth at this point, it's going to be ones that I speak myself. Daijoubu desu ka? I have fun with languages, but yeah, I'm not doing that right now. But these are things I could have done. And if I had done that, I would have disclosed that. So one of the things I like to do is collect disaster stories. And in this presentation, I'm going to be sharing some AI disaster stories. Here is one that I think will pertain to us as actuaries. Now, these were not actuaries who had done this report, I don't think. I believe this had to do with kind of an IT control system. I did not dig into what this report was about, actually. I think it was about IT controls. It may have been about an accounting system controls. No clue. I don't care, because that's not what this story is about per se. It actually started in July or August this year, in terms of Deloitte in Australia had given to the government a report of recommendations, and some people pored over the report and found that there were a variety of indications, of course, that AI/LLMs had been used and hallucinations were in the report, and gave it back. And so that is the link at the bottom right, and I'm not going to get into that. So, the Australian government came back to Deloitte and said, hey, I think you need to redo this. So Deloitte said, oh, our bad, redid the report and resubmitted it, and there were still problems. So this is one of the issues that keeps coming up. I think people don't necessarily object to the use of AI and LLMs. We kind of expect that. It's the quality of the work that comes through that you didn't even bother to review, that, it's as if you're using internet searches to find the information, fine, but you didn't even check that the information that you put into your report was even true. Deloitte refunded their client some money, but evidently not the whole fee. University of Sydney academic Dr. Christopher Rudge, who first highlighted the errors, said the report contained hallucinations where AI models may fill in gaps, misinterpret data, or try to guess answers. Instead of just substituting one hallucinated fake reference for a new real reference, they've substituted the fake hallucinated references, and in the new version, there's like 5, 6, or 7 or 8 in their place. They made it worse. And we cannot be having this as actuaries. Here's another situation. This one is even worse because this was a report specifically about the ethical use of AI in education for Newfoundland and Labrador. So this is in Canada. And this one, and again, I have not been able to find the whole series of events. This was a government report. They got some academics to put this together. This quote, final report, and you can't find it online. I dug up a picture of someone had a physical copy that had been printed out very thick. And again, unsurprisingly, hallucinated references of research reports and that kind of thing. And it's very easy to find these, especially in these large research reports. So in September of this year, education report calling for ethical use. Ethical AI use contains over 15 fake sources. And of course, when it's hundreds of pages, we almost expect this now. Education Accord co-chairs blame government for fake sources. The people who put this report together say it's not their fault, that they had submitted a draft that they had put together that did not contain these sources. And this is actually an issue of process. So something to think about. A lot of us work. It's group work, committee work, that we put something together, actually. And I had submitted an article to the SOA that I had put notes in there for the editors. And when I saw it was published, I noticed my notes were still there. The editors hadn't done anything with it. Okay. I'm just like, okay, who did that make look bad? I don't know. Why use AI? Let's be serious. For many of us, we're not being given a choice. If we work for an employer, we may be told this is what we have to do. This is from a recent Wall Street Journal article, and it went down a list of companies where people were being upskilled in AI skills, or, well, you're gone. That said, what do we mean by using AI? This is from a 1979 IBM training manual, I think, for management. Computers can never be held accountable. Therefore, a computer must never make a management decision. A better way of putting this is you can't sue a computer and you can't blame a computer. Humans are always ultimately responsible. So we can be using AI as a tool, just like, using internet search, or just like using a spell checker or a grammar checker or whatever we use, or an Excel spreadsheet for that matter. But ultimately, we're the ones who are going to be making decisions, or we're doing the work, or we do a review. We're the ones who put something in front of a client. You can put your name on it or not. We're responsible. This is where professionalism comes in. Just because we have these tools that can do all sorts of things beyond what we had before, and that's why people are using them. In some cases, yes, we're getting very frustrated with them, and I turn all sorts of AI features off that are not helpful at all. That said, I have found many to be extremely helpful. It's a matter of finding where I'm getting the power. So, as actuaries, what can we do? Now, I am an American-based actuary. I'm not assuming everyone who's watching this is U.S.-based. That said, I am going to use the U.S. Actuarial Code of Conduct and Actuarial Standards of Practice. You don't have to be U.S.-based to follow these. If you're from a different country, you will have your own codes of conduct and standards of practice. There may be other terms for it. A lot of them will have similar principles. A lot of them will overlap. You'll have different regulations that you have to follow. That's different. We actuaries are better than everybody else. We at least consider ourselves better than lawyers, better than accountants. No, I mean, I'm just joking. That said, these help us at a high level to maintain high quality, high ethics. We are considered to have high integrity in our work. And just because AI exists doesn't mean we have to walk away from these principles. Just, a little bit of boilerplate here. The specific items that I'm going to be following applies to the actuarial members of the following orgs. Some of these orgs have non-actuarial members, okay? But I'm an FSA, Fellow of the Society of Actuaries. I'm a member of the American Academy of Actuaries, so these apply to me. But you don't have to be an actuary, and actually most of the time I'm not doing explicitly actuarial work. That said, I find following these principles gets me a reputation of high quality work, and really, I think that's a good thing to have. It's a choice. So here are some precepts. These are not all of the precepts from the Code of Conduct, but the ones I think that are most pertinent to AI use and professionalism. The first one that always pertains is Precept 1, professional integrity, maintaining that high level of quality that people can rely on what you do. Precept 2, qualifications. Now, most of the time we're thinking in terms of, you got your actuarial exams, you do your continuing education. Hey, you're getting perhaps a professionalism credit for listening to me talk. That's part of it. But also, if you're using AI, make sure you have the skill to do what you're doing and using these AI tools. Some of the people getting in trouble with using the AI tools don't know what they're doing or don't know the tools they're using and how they behave and are not using them appropriately. Precept 3 has to do with following the appropriate actuarial standards of practice, and I'll be getting to that in a moment. Precept 4 has to do with communications and disclosure. There's an ASOP for that, actuarial standard of practice for communications and disclosure as well. But note at the beginning of this presentation, I disclosed the use of AI tools in putting together this presentation. I haven't gotten to any of the slides that I created with AI yet, by the way. Precept 8, there's a variety of things in this. It has to do with making sure your work isn't used to mislead, perhaps third parties. Usually this is interpret Precept 8 with regards to, you're doing, say, an actual report for your client or the principal of your work. This could be for an employer, but trying to make sure that is not misinterpreted or used, perhaps for a third party. And this you can think at a higher level with regards to AI, with not just the hallucinations that we're talking about, but sometimes there's all sorts of, we'll just say, mistruths, falsities, fictions that come through with the use of AI. And then Precept 9, confidentiality. And a lot of people who have been using these AI tools perhaps have not been following this as closely as they should. Do not put your client data into ChatGPT, say, the open one, because how are the data that you're uploading into these cloud software, and it's not just AI tools, just any tools, that other people's confidential data is getting put into various models. It's supposed to be kept confidential. precept 9 pertains here. Some people may not think, oh, it's a new tech toy. So a reminder, confidential data is supposed to remain confidential. So let's look at actuarial standards of practice, again, US based, that would apply to AI. I always like to use this a couple of panels from a Batman comic. There are 3 kinds of lies: damn lies, and statistics. And the character on the right is a very short-lived penguin henchman, the actuary, who failed. You have to look that one up. I've written about him a couple times. But there are 4 ASOPs that AI may impact, and we are getting some regulations, especially with ASOP 12, risk classification. And this may not affect you if you're not involved in, say, pricing and underwriting and that kind of thing. But there is a lot of regulatory activity around the use of AI, machine learning, other algorithms, and using data. And this is actually not new, but there have been updates with regards to ASOP 12. I'm not going to really focus on ASOP 12 too much. David Schraub is doing a session here, the Actuarial Tech Forum, with regards to how you can test for bias in your algorithms, because this is a very hot topic. ASOP 41, actuarial communications. You may be using AI in your communications, but also what do you need to disclose about your usage of ASOP 23, data quality? And so AI is affecting data quality, and there's some issues with regards to perhaps model degradation as I'm just going to use the term AI slop, may be poisoning the AI models themselves. It is a concern in the community. And then there's ASOP 56, modeling. AI models are models that one is using, and you might want to look at aspects of the AI models you're using. All of these ASOPs can be useful. ASOP 12 may not pertain to the work you're doing, but that's good to look at if you're having to deal with risk classification and thinking about how new AI tech and other aspects may be getting in there. And there's a lot of new regulations going around there. The NAC has a lot of discussions, maybe not explicitly regarding ASOP 12, but testing algorithms and having to look for bias and aspects like that. What I've found useful, and I'm not going to get into all of the details. I'm not going to, get into every single thing. I did cover this last year as well at the Actuarial Tech Forum. There are often checklists that you can create from these ASOPs. If you've read the Actuarial Standards of Practice in the US, most of them are not really practice notes per se, in that they will not tell you how to do the various things, like how to model, how to check for data quality and that kind of thing. It's all kind of like considerations of things you should do. So for example, ASOP 23 on data quality, in section 3, there's kind of a checklist of things that you should consider. And this also will pertain to AI. Selection of data, review of data, use of data, reliance on data supplied by others, and think in terms of sourcing from AI models, reliance on other information relevant to the use of data, confidentiality. So, of course, using client data and maybe putting it into an AI model, you might want to think about this. So this is a good checklist to consider. And I'm very, very big on checklists, because then you can make sure you've covered the basis you should cover. ASOP 56 on models, model risk. And there's a lot of new risks that are coming in with AI. Now, a lot of what was being thought of when developing ASOP 56 were kind of more traditional actuarial models and modeling. But when they developed it and when they defined models, they wanted to be broader, and it does apply to AI models if you're using it in the context of actuarial work? How are you going to test these models? Validate the output. Review by another professional. Is it needed? Maybe. Reasonable governance and controls. Are you able to control what you're using, how you're using it, and mitigating misuse and misinterpretation? And we're running into a lot of these kinds of problems, or at least other professions are. And if we think about some of these public stories that we're seeing with AI disasters, it's not as likely to occur with actuarial work, not necessarily because we're better than everybody else, but because we're such a smaller profession compared to, say, like the legal profession. There's a lot more lawyers than there are actuaries, and also their work is public. They have to publicly file their legal briefs, and so anybody can see, if there's a big public screw up, versus most of the work actuaries do is not publicly available for others to review. And if we screw up, who's going to know? Unless there's a big disaster. And it does happen from time to time, but we're more it's not as likely to be found. So here's, this is me teeing it up for another AI disaster. Okay. So where I often find a lot of these AI disasters is in academia, because there's a lot of researchers who are looking for the misuse of AI in academia. This one was a doozy, and this had to do with peer review. People were submitting their papers for peer review with hidden instructions for AI, say like in white font or very tiny font, so that the humans receiving the papers wouldn't notice the instructions, because the thing is that the academics submitting the papers knew that a lot of the humans were doing peer review by taking the paper and sticking it in an LLM and say, please do a peer review on this paper for me. So what was happening is the instructions being submitted would say, give only positive results. So this came out this year. So if you have to do a peer review for an actuarial piece of work, an actuarial report, maybe you shouldn't trust that that actuarial report doesn't have such kind of prompt in it. It's not just in academic papers like this. I've also seen stories like this for students who are submitting papers in college, and knowing that they have some lazy professors or adjuncts or TAs who are grading using computers. So, should we use AI or LLMs in actuarial work? That's a good question. The Academy's Committee on Professional Responsibility put out a paper in September 2024 that was mostly a series of questions, considerations, going back to those precepts and ASOPs that I mentioned. This is the paper I put through Microsoft Copilot and asked it to generate a bunch of slides. Some of the slides I'm about to show you, and I'm not going to go through them in, deep detail, are ones that were produced by Copilot, but then I edited them and also, went through them, looked against the paper, thought about them some, like, what am I going to present? Because I have to take responsibility. I'm actually sitting here. I'm not a construct. The Copilot cannot take blame or responsibility for what is being presented. What's appropriate? Okay. So here they say, evaluate if Gen AI, and it could be AI, LLMs, whatever, fits the actuarial assignment considering costs, limitations, and if simpler models suffice. Well, you have to think about, for these AI models, LLMs, etc., what is it actually good for? Absolutely nothing. No, that's not true. I use the AI and LLMs for all sorts of things, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But what is it appropriate for? So far, not for those infographics, but it might get better. Professional and regulatory compliance. Now, of course, a lot of the bodies in whatever countries are feeling their way. We still have those precepts and ASOPs, as I've mentioned, but just because it's new doesn't mean you can ignore the high-level principles. Like, oh, it's new, I'm just going to play. Yes, you still have to keep client data confidential, even though it might be really neat to stick it into ChatGPT. Maybe don't do that. Managing the limitations and biases, I said, I'm not getting into the bias aspect so much, but you need to know what are the limitations of these models and be aware of them. I mean, that was my main frustration in starting with these tools and verifying the results. Now, I didn't have to do it so much with these slides that were generated by Copilot, but some of the issues, of course, is every time you say use a prompt, you'll get different results. Sometimes it's material and sometimes it's not. And these can be issues in actuarial work. But one of the things that comes up often is disclosure, and where people are running into trouble is when they don't disclose. And what do we mean by disclosing? So in the case here, this is coming, directly from this slide. The content of the slide was generated by Copilot. I edited the formatting. I tightened up some of the, there was too many words on the slide. So, I adjusted that somewhat. I deleted some things I didn't like, stuff like that. I made sure that whatever was on the slide, I agreed with. How much did I rely on the AI? But I also selected which slides I wanted to keep from Copilot. So I'm kind of having a meta discussion here of what was there, but you can see what the original ones were when we get to the end here. And transparency in AI use addresses ethical concerns and fosters informed decision-making. Your clients are going to want to know, how much is the human judgment and how much was it kind of like, put it into the machine and it spits out whatever from the black box. Some of what is undermining these consultants' work, from like the case of Deloitte in Australia, is, a lot of their recommendations, and they're saying, and Deloitte is saying, our recommendations for your strategy, IT strategy or whatever, are solid. They probably are. However, because they were, let's just say it's sloppy in the process of review, that to try to say bulk up the report, they use the LLMs to generate citations, and now they have all these hallucinations in there. The core is undermined because of all this frippery detail that they use the AI to generate. So, integrity, standards, confidentiality, it's just like a hammer through. This was obviously, if you can't tell, AI generated this entire slide. I just made the font bigger so you could see it better. That's the main thing on this slide. I am just going to keep beating this stuff into people's heads because this is where a lot of people have gotten sloppy. There's the hallucinations issue, and I think a lot of actuaries are detail-oriented people, and that would drive us nuts too. But where some actuaries have gotten sloppy, like, it won't hurt if I put this file of client data into it, like, it won't actually be used in OpenAI. Let's not, gamble on that. So here starts coming the question. And so I generated this slide. So what level of AI should be disclosed? And all of these, so transcribe a meeting and then extract action items. This is pretty standard in a lot of the conferencing types of software. I use otter.ai, but Teams often has this embedded. You can record a meeting, it'll transcribe it, and then it'll give you action items at the end. Do you have to disclose that? You have to disclose that you're recording it. I think everyone knows that once you're recording it, that you're transcribing it, that really needs to be disclosed. It's something that I often do because I am awful at coming up with titles for articles. I use AI to come up with 10 article ideas, and then I go around to my colleagues and say, which of these 10 is the best? And then we come up to an agreement. And often then we change it a little bit, tweak it a little bit. Do I need to tell you that I used AI to come up with the title of an article? Write an executive summary for a report. I made the whole report, say it's 10,000 words, 5,000 words, whatever. And then I say, give me an executive summary. Often do that. And then I usually edit it. I never leave it alone. Edit down a 5,000 word article to 2,000 words. I often overwrite. I mean, I've done all of these things, by the way. Well, not the translate an article from Chinese. Well, no, I actually have translated an article from Chinese into English. Well, more likely Japanese. Okay. I didn't publish it under my name. That would really, yeah, talk about lack of integrity. Transform a report into a PowerPoint deck. I've done that and gotten awful results. I don't like it. Generate a legal filing. I'm not a lawyer. So, but we'll see. And I obviously did that for a reason. But, what should you disclose? What level of detail? Should you be disclosing the prompts you used? In some of these cases, the prompts are very simple. But what should you be telling? Who should you be telling what you're using? So here we go. Legal cases. So here is my source for what is about to come. This is a nice little source, and it has 624 entries when I looked at it. And I wanted to find a case that had a monetary penalty for those who were naughty. Not all of them. Some of them just got, you were bad, resubmit. But some of them were asked to resubmit. They resubmitted and there were still hallucinations in their legal briefs. So these were all situations that made it to Westlaw or one of those legal databases. And he gives credit to whoever brought this to his attention. And these are all legal decisions were involved. So it can't just be some kind of filing or something proposed or a draft. It has to involve a legal decision. So a judge had to have said something about it at some point. And in some of these cases, it was the judge who screwed up, by the way. So I wanted to pick one that involved insurance, Lacey versus State Farm General Insurance. It was not, thank goodness, it wasn't on the insurance side. It was on the Lacey side, so the plaintiff. The counsel used AI tools from Westlaw and Google Gemini to draft the brief. And so it produced an outline, and, that produced various citations and quotations, which were hallucinated case law. That was developed into filings. They obviously did not review it properly. Some of these, they had a special master on the State Farm General Insurance side. They reviewed it. They found all sorts of problems. The judge gave it back, or the special master gave it back to the plaintiff counsel and said, fix this. Even after they resubmitted it, there were 6 hallucinations still remaining. And they never disclosed they used AI until basically the judge forced them to. And that's how they found out about what happened. There were various sanctions. There were actually 2 separate sanctions and blah, blah, blah. $31,000 in sanctions. And I have a link to how this happened. But, there's other cases too. I just wanted to find one that involved insurance as an example. So let's be clear, a lot of these standards with regards to disclosure of AI use are still being developed. I found an article, yes, with AI assistance, Gemini helped me find this, with regards to academic writing. They came up with 2 different levels of AI use. I think there's a continuum, but let's just say level 2 is kind of the spell checker kind of level. Get LaTeX code for tables, organize your citations, editing your language. That's, tighten up the language that you've already written, labeling graphs, that sort of thing. You don't really need to disclose that so much as just the generic tool that everyone expects. But level 1, and this is a quote, substantial use when AI is used to make decisions that directly affect research results and to generate and or analyze content, data, or images. And I often use AI to analyze text that is data. So I have some text-based data that I use in the work I do because it's market-related data, insurance market-related data, and I'm finding it to be a very powerful tool to as an adjunct to the quantitative data I have. So, do I have to disclose that, as actuarial work? That's a tool, just like I would be using Excel as a tool. But do I disclose that I use that? So here's some practical tips that I've found because, as I said, I've been using AI tools more and more. Obviously, it's difficult to avoid them when they're embedded in everything we use now. But before you use it or, before you're getting the output, know the systems that you're using. So I'm not just talking about ChatGPT. There's a whole bunch of different systems. I mentioned Otter.ai, which is used for transcribing meetings or just transcribing audio in general. But I'm also using Camtasia right now for recording this presentation. So what is the system you're using or what is this model you're using optimized or tuned for? They have various parameters which you may or may not be able to adjust yourself. With regards to confidentiality, so I use Microsoft Copilot in Office, and it's kind of sandboxed such that the RAGs, the data of our own company and our clients, are just within our company, and it doesn't go back to Microsoft. It doesn't get out in the cloud beyond our company. So confidentiality is maintained. And when I say training for optimal results, like how do you optimally prompt, or how do you put your input into these systems to get the best results? A lot of people are still learning how to do that because these models are being developed. This is similarly to being trained in best approaches in programming and structuring your code and all of that. People are trying to do vibe coding with GPT and other things like that and learning their way of the iterative process of how to get best results. It's a lot of people are working together to learn how to do this. So I recommend this is how you're going to get situations where you're less likely to have to repair what's coming out as output. So let's try to prevent the errors, the hallucinations and falsities before they start. Some of it will still creep in, but I'm often asking for the references, get what I need out of the system, and that's part of the prompt, and I have certain structured approaches to the prompting. But my motto has been distrust and verify. I really don't trust these models. A lot of them are very new. I've always gotten an eye out for what is most likely to go wrong. That's why with these infographics, they're all bleh. Maintaining skepticism, unfortunately. And I think for actuaries, we tend to be natural skeptics for these not so quantitative models. The documentation and disclosure, when I have a prompt that gets output that I'm going to use, I don't just get the output, I also grab the prompt I use. I save my chats and that kind of thing that I'm using for work. So I highly recommend doing that, especially since you might want to get a library of prompts if you're going to be using them over and over again. And then some people, of course, build agents that they might be using for repetitive tasks. So here's one of the things I used in Gemini to make some of the slides you saw today. At the bottom, Gemini itself. Gemini can make mistakes, so double check it. Gemini tells you, beware. That's really what we have to do at this point. It's still pretty nascent. I think I'm still getting a lot of usefulness out of the software, just not a lot of the things that some people were, like, as you can see, not the infographics. I still very much promote checklists. If you're including it in your process, definitely has to get reviewed. But also know that there are skills involved that you need to have. Well, it says qualification. So this is one of the slides that got generated by Copilot from the Academy paper. maybe do have some standardized training, especially if you have people actually junior and senior. Some people are just not skeptical enough. And maybe it's, no actuarial exams here, please. But some people do need to have some structured training of how to approach these tools. And again, confidentiality, standards, and communication. So here we go. Got back to, I'm not going to point out all the problems with the infographic on the left. What you see on the right is a graph I did in Excel with the data, and actually those labels all came from Google Gemini. So I used a table that it put into Google Sheets, but Google Sheets is not good at graphing. And you can see a nano banana or whatever they call it in Google is also not good at graphing, not accurately at least. I actually had an argument with Google Gemini telling it originally, so it gave me that graph originally, and then I told it to start the axis at 0, but the drawing was exactly the same. I can go down a list of everything that's wrong with that. I don't need to. I leave it as an exercise to the viewer. The numbers on the right for the population are correct. They'd come from the US Census. I'm sorry, I didn't label the graph. I should have. Some of the key facts that are bulleted on the infographic to the left are correct. It's the third largest city in the US. The peak population was in 1950 for the decadal or decennial census. It may have occurred somewhere in the middle there, and it's from the US Census Bureau. And you can read some of the explanation it has in the timeline of the growth and then the decline of Chicago in terms of its population. But all of the labels for the data came from Google Gemini. But I had to use it as an adjunct. It's just still not there yet for taking the data and then making a graph. So this is going to wrap up the pre-recorded portion of this session, and we'll have a live Q&A. I should be popping up again. There's some extra slides in the deck, and the deck should be available to everybody. Somehow we'll figure that out. And I'll be here to answer your questions in the appendix. I have links to that Copilot generated deck of boredom and some more AI disasters that you may or may not enjoy. So let's get to it.